What should have been a simple motorcycle swap meet turned into one of the bloodiest days in Australian history. At the Viking Tavern in Milperra, families browsed bike parts, children played between stalls, and fathers showed off their machines. Everything seemed normal until the Comancheros arrived. 19 members strong, they came armed and ready for trouble. Minutes later, their rivals rolled in, the Bandidos. 34 bikers outnumbering the Comancheros, equally prepared for war. 2 motorcycle clubs, 1 car park, years of hatred about to erupt. Within seconds, fists flew, then came the gunfire. Shotguns roared, pistols cracked, and automatic weapons echoed through the suburban air. The quiet of Father's Day shattered in a storm of bullets, screams, and chaos. When the smoke cleared, 7 people were dead. 4 Comancheros, 2 Bandidos, and a 14-year-old girl caught in the crossfire. Another 28 were wounded. What had started as a swap meet ended as the deadliest biker shootout Australia had ever seen. The massacre did not happen overnight. Just a year earlier, in 1983, the Comancheros, one of Australia's most feared motorcycle clubs, split apart. Internal disputes boiled over when Anthony Snodgrass Spencer led a breakaway faction. Instead of fading away, Spencer's group sought power and international credibility. They reached across the Pacific, aligning themselves with the Bandidos Motorcycle Club in Texas. By November 1983, the Bandidos had officially planted their first chapter outside the United States, on Australian soil. This was more than a name change. It was a declaration of war. Jock Ross, the militaristic leader of the Comancheros, now faced his former brothers turned bitter enemies. Spencer, backed by the Bandidos, was determined to prove his rebellion was no mistake. Pride, honor, and personal grudges fueled a feud that could only end in violence. By mid-1984, Sydney was tense. The split between the Comancheros and the new Bandidos wasn't just rivalry, it was a countdown to war. Week after week, confrontations broke out in pubs, clubhouses, and suburban streets. Members stalked each other's territory. Words turned into fights. Guns were stockpiled. Informants told police that both clubs were preparing for more than intimidation. They were preparing for open warfare. Everyone in the underworld knew it was only a matter of time before violence erupted. On Father's Day, September 2nd, 1984, families gathered at the Viking Tavern swap meet, organized by the British Motorcycle Club. It was meant to be a friendly community event. Around 1 p.m., the uneasy calm broke. A convoy of 19 Comancheros arrived, spreading out information with walkie-talkies and weapons hidden close at hand. Witnesses later compared their entrance to a military maneuver, deliberate, controlled, and threatening. Not long after, the rumble of motorcycles filled the air again. The Bandidos arrived, 34 bikers armed with pistols, shotguns, chains, and knives. Their numbers alone sent a message. They were here to dominate. Families watched nervously as the two groups faced off across the parking lot. Shouts escalated to insults. Then, in a split second, the first gunshot rang out. Panic spread as gunfire erupted in every direction. Bikers ducked behind cars and stalls, returning fire with shotguns and pistols. Others charged forward, swinging weapons in brutal close combat. Ordinary civilians scrambled for cover, children dragged to the ground by terrified parents. In less than half an hour, the car park had transformed into a battlefield. When the shooting stopped, 7 people were dead. Among them were 4 Comancheros and 2 Bandidos, men who had once called each other brothers. But the death that shook the nation most was that of 14-year-old Leanne Walters, a local girl struck by a stray bullet. Her killing turned the shootout from a gang war into a national tragedy. Suddenly, Australia saw not just bikers killing bikers, but innocent lives destroyed by outlaw violence. Another 28 people were injured, some shot, others beaten, many simply caught in the chaos. Survivors later recalled bullets whistling past their heads, cars riddled with holes, and the overwhelming smell of gunpowder. Police flooded the Viking Tavern within minutes. What they found was carnage, bodies sprawled across the car park, wounded men staggering, terrified civilians running for safety. Weapons lay scattered across the ground. The area was sealed off. Armed officers ordered everyone to the ground and began confiscating dozens of firearms, handguns, rifles, shotguns, and makeshift weapons. Paramedics set up triage zones in the parking lot as ambulances rushed the wounded to hospitals, where rival bikers often ended up in neighboring beds. Detectives collected hundreds of pieces of evidence, spent shells, bullet holes in walls and cars, discarded weapons. Witnesses gave statements describing the chaos that turned a community event into a war zone. The violence of Milperra didn't end in the car park. It carried into the courtroom. What followed was one of the largest joint criminal trials in New South Wales history. Dozens of bikers from both clubs were charged, not just as individuals but under the doctrine of common purpose. This meant every man who participated could be held responsible for the deaths, whether or not they fired a fatal shot. The trial became a spectacle. Rows of bikers filled the dock as prosecutors presented ballistic evidence, autopsy reports, and eyewitness testimony. Civilians described the terror of being caught in the crossfire. Police detailed the sheer firepower seized that day. In the end, the verdict was clear. 9 men were convicted of murder, 21 were found guilty of manslaughter, dozens more faced weapons charges. The Milperra Massacre remains Australia's deadliest biker shootout. It forced the nation to confront the violent reality of outlaw motorcycle gangs and reshaped how police and courts dealt with organized crime. What began as a Father's Day swap meet ended in bloodshed, leaving scars that would never fully heal, and a reminder of what happens when loyalty, pride, and vengeance spiral out of control. The sentences handed down after the Milperra Massacre varied, but for many bikers they meant long years in prison. Importantly, the trial underscored a new principle in Australian law enforcement. Outlaw motorcycle gangs would be pursued collectively. Once you chose to ride with your club that day, you could not hide behind the idea of being a bystander. Media coverage was relentless. Headlines branded it the Milperra Massacre trial, and public outrage over the violence ensured every detail was broadcast. For the families of the victims, especially the Walters family, mourning 14-year-old Leanne, the convictions brought a measure of justice, though nothing could undo the loss. By the time verdicts were read, the message was clear. The state was prepared to use the full weight of the law against outlaw motorcycle gangs. Leadership on trial. At the center of the proceedings was William Jock Ross, the Scottish-born founder of the Comanchero Motorcycle Club. After serving in the British Army, Ross established the club in Sydney in 1968, bringing with him a rigid sense of hierarchy and military discipline. For years, he ruled with absolute authority, demanding loyalty and punishing dissent. That authoritarian style eventually led to the split of 1983, when Anthony Snodgrass Spencer broke away with a faction that would soon align with the Bandidos. By Father's Day 1984, Ross was not merely a club leader, he was a battlefield commander. Prosecutors argued that his decisions before and during the Milperra clash carried direct legal weight. Under the doctrine of common purpose, Ross's leadership role meant he shared responsibility for the violence. Witnesses testified that Ross was present at the swap meet, coordinated his men with walkie-talkies, and directed the aggressive posture that led to the shootout. In court, Ross became a symbol of the dangers of outlaw motorcycle leadership. a single man whose choices had escalated a rivalry into mass bloodshed. Ultimately, he was convicted on multiple counts, including manslaughter, and sentenced to prison. His downfall carried symbolic weight. Australia's oldest outlaw motorcycle club founder, now shackled in the dock, paying the price for leading his men into the deadliest biker shootout the country had ever seen. The Milperra Massacre did not only leave bodies on the ground, it sent shockwaves through New South Wales politics. The sight of automatic shotguns and pistols blazing in a suburban car park forced lawmakers to admit the state's firearms laws were dangerously weak. In 1985, the New South Wales Parliament passed urgent reforms through amendments to the Firearms and Dangerous Weapons Act. Licensing was tightened, background checks became more rigorous, carrying guns in public was restricted. The clear lesson was that outlaw motorcycle clubs had been able to stockpile and openly use weapons with little oversight, and that loophole had to be closed. For the first time, gun access was treated not as a casual right, but as a heavily regulated privilege. These reforms are remembered as a turning point. While Australia already had gun controls, Milperra exposed how organized groups could accumulate serious firepower. This set a precedent. Major bloodshed would trigger stronger laws. That pattern reemerged on a national scale after the 1996 Port Arthur Massacre, which led to the National Firearms Agreement. Many historians trace a direct line from Milperra to Port Arthur, two tragedies each reshaping how Australians viewed firearms. For law enforcement, Milperra was a wake-up call. Before 1984, police often treated biker gangs as fringe troublemakers, intervening only after fights or brawls. But the massacre revealed something far more dangerous. Outlaw clubs were organized, heavily armed, and capable of urban warfare. In its aftermath, New South Wales police shifted strategy. Dedicated task forces began monitoring outlaw clubs around the clock. Surveillance, phone taps, undercover operatives, even aerial monitoring became standard tools to map networks and anticipate violence. Informant cultivation also grew in importance. The massacre proved that intelligence gathering could prevent bloodshed, and police learned to flip insiders to build long-term cases against leadership, as well as rank-and-file members. This shift shaped future operations such as Strike Force Raptor and National Task Forces. Officers often trace these tactics back to lessons learned at Milperra, that waiting until shots were fired was unacceptable. The massacre did not stay in court transcripts. It became part of Australia's national story. From the first hours, newspapers and television splashed images of blood-stained cars and bullet casings across front pages. The fact it happened on Father's Day in a suburban car park made it all the more shocking. In the decades since, the event has been revisited through documentaries, retrospectives, and dramatizations. Most notably the 2012 miniseries Bikie Wars, Brothers in Arms. Though dramatized, it showed how deeply the story had entered Australian culture. Even today, YouTube clips and interviews about Milperra continue to draw interest. Milperra was not the end of the conflict. Both the Comancheros and the Bandidos rebuilt in the years that followed, remaining among the most visible outlaw motorcycle clubs in Australia. While none of their later clashes matched the scale of Father's Day 1984, each confrontation was viewed through the shadow of Milperra. For police and the public alike, the massacre ensured the Comanchero-Bandido rivalry would forever be treated as a serious and dangerous threat. The statistics remain stark: 7 dead, 4 Comancheros, 2 Bandidos, and 1 innocent 14-year-old girl, and 28 injured. No other biker conflict in Australia has matched that toll. Those numbers made Milperra the deadliest outlaw motorcycle confrontation in the nation's history, and they remain a permanent marker in debates about organized crime, policing, and public safety. The Milperra Massacre was more than a violent afternoon in 1984. It marked a turning point in Australia's history of organized crime. It cemented the arrival of the Bandidos, forced New South Wales to rethink gun laws, and pushed police into intelligence-driven operations that still define their approach today. For many Australians, Milperra shattered the illusion that outlaw motorcycle clubs were just fringe subcultures. The violence of that day showed how quickly rivalries could spill into suburban streets with devastating consequences. Nearly 4 decades later, the massacre remains both a warning and a watershed moment in how Australia confronts organized crime.